Elinor is an award-winning author of 16 books, including The Inn at Lake Devine, Ms. Demeanor, which was the Thurber Prize in American Humor. Thank you, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, finalist. Sorry about that. And I Can't Complain, all two personal essays. Her latest work, Every Tom, Dick, and Harry, continues her tradition of lively charm, humor, and social satire, featuring a quirky cast of characters and a delightful romantic hero. Praised for her wit and clever social commentary, Lipman has earned comparisons to Jane Austen for her sharp observations and engaging storytelling. Kate Feiffer is the author of the comedic novel Morning Pages and 11 books for children. She illustrated the poetry book The Lamb Cycle by David R. Ewbank, and her artwork can be seen at the A Gallery in Edgartown this summer. She serves as the event producer for the MV Times Writing Festival Islanders Write. Please join me in welcoming them to the festival this morning.
Hello? There we go.
Yes.
This is such a privilege and thrill to meet you and to be interviewing you. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry is delightful. It's funny. And there are so many twists and plot twists and unexpected turns that we'll get into. So thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. This has been, this is day 3, and it's just been the best festival. I'm just so impressed. I've met the most wonderful people. So, yes, I'm thrilled.
So before we get started, your writing was compared to Jane Austen in that introduction. I would like to just read a little something that compares it to another writer, but this is from Booklist. In the delightfully reassuring rom-com tradition of Nora Ephron, the perennially mood-lifting Lipman is equally revered for her lovable character, spitfire wit, and happily ever after romantic escapades. So there you go, Jane Austen, Nora Ephron.
I do love that quote, actually. Thank you. Yes.
So let's start. I'd like to start by talking about Emma, because this is really Emma's book. And Emma, who's 32, was sort of gifted, perhaps not to, gifted the business that her parents had, the house that her parents lived in, and even a colleague, sort of her father's at work as a roommate. So can you tell us a little bit about how Emma came to you and who Emma is? And
Sure. Emma, she was handed the reins. She's had a sort of spotty career since college. She'd do some online degrees in, journalism and writing, but mostly just had retail jobs. And it takes place in a not very fictional town. I call it Harrow, Massachusetts. It's such a thinly disguised Northampton, where I lived for 25 years, that I don't even bother. I think I left in Amherst, Springfield, Agawam, Route 9, Big Y, the corn stand right over the bridge. So her parents are very doting, and they pretend they want to retire. They buy a condo in Brewster, I forget, on the Cape for sure. And so here's the estate business, which they called Finders Keepers. And by the way, you can live in the house and the mortgage is paid, but of course there are still some expenses and taxes. So how about a boarder? And how about Frank Crowley, who happened to be her old algebra teacher? So that's sort of the setup. But with me, it could be interesting to have my narrator and the main character own an estate sale business. That was really just it. And then I take it just sort of one sentence at a time.
And when you go into the family business, as I sort of know, you kind of want to make it your own, but struggle with that because it's got a reputation that's maybe bigger than you are. So how do you make it your own? And Emma does that.
She renames it something a little more, zeitgeisty, which is a state of mind. And her parents go along with everything, sort of long distance, and of course they show up at least about halfway through the book because it's a visit, and they. I don't want to give too much away.
So I'd love just to set the scene. Maybe if you'd read the first page.
Sure. Yes. Not even. I'll read sort of a half a page, and then I'll introduce Frank. My new business card reads, "A state of mind," and below, in italics, "We empty your nest." Though I've been working alone since my parents retired, I've retained the "we" for sentimental reasons, and to sound less like the one-woman operation I hope to keep afloat. I've been estate sale adjacent since I could add and give change, spending weekends at a table, wrapping and bagging purchases. If buyers tried to negotiate, I'd point to the stated price on the tag or sticker and ask blankly, "Do you not want it?" But the grown-up me has learned to be kinder and more psychiatric. I know when to handhold and when to hard sell. Some clients can tell a story about every item in their house if I let them, and sometimes I do. If everyone is convinced that the unsigned portrait over the fireplace is an old master, I don't argue. I let the small local auction house with which I have a relationship, I recommend them, they recommend me, be the bad guy. As ever, they agree that the work in question is either NSV, no sale value, or TFO, the frame only. So I'll read another paragraph later.
Okay, so Emma goes into this business, and the first sort of twist we discover is there's a house on Quail Ridge Road of some renown. Can you just explain what that renown might be? And
yes, I will. First of all, it was sort of searching for a name of a street that sounded kind of posh, so Quail Ridge seemed to fit. Yes. A friend of the aforementioned Frank Crowley, the boarder, has noticed a for sale sign at the grandest house on the street, which she finds out was not only a bed and breakfast, but also that was a cover for it being a brothel. No longer in business, but yeah, a history for sure.
so while this book takes place in a fictional town that you say is much like Northampton, I kept thinking while I was reading it, Chilmark. You also have this incredible. The characters are so great, but there's this cast of rogues, and one of them, one of the main characters in the book is dead, Ginger, and she is, even though we never meet her alive, she is very much a presence in the book, and. Is it a spoiler to give away how she dies?
No, because we hear about that within the first few chapters. She, and maybe I will read a paragraph about Frank, but so Frank, the now retired department head and algebra teacher, was sort of seduced into marriage by this woman, Ginger, and I got rid of her. She was struck by lightning on her birthday on the golf course, and just like that. And so it made him a not very grieving widow, except he's such a kind person. He feels that, he should observe widowhood protocol for a year. And so that's something I deal with in terms of, I had to fix him up, didn't I? Yeah.
It was also such a public death that everyone knows,
front page.
Yeah.
Small town, front page news, yes.
Yes. And the other character who is just so colorful, and who isn't like a major character in the book, but is such a major sort of, vineyard type, is Manny.
Lois is the brothel owner, now retired and living in California. She has an ex-husband who also was the chief of police. So he was what, in our British police procedurals would be known as a bent cop, big time. Oh, and now in retirement, he thinks he's an artist. So I had a little fun with that.
Okay, so I want to talk about the role of art in this book because art comes up in 3 different major ways, and some of them are going to be spoilers. So I don't know how much you want to say, but maybe I just want to ask about your relationship to art, or why you brought this in, or what you do want to say about it. I know that some of them, definitely there's 1 or 2 that will you can't talk about.
It's always, in several books ago, a book called On Turpentine Lane, I have a character who decides that he could make a little money doing what would it be, sort of fake Chagalls. Definitely everyone would know they were forgeries, but it would be like if your daughter's getting bat mitzvahed or you're getting married and you want an anniversary, he will customize a Chagall for you. So I think that, and I had fun with that, of course. And then in Ms. Demeanor, one of the main characters, the love interest, was an art handler in an auction house. And in this one, I'm trying to think about giving it anyway. Well, this is a big hint, but there's a wonderful nonfiction book called The Art Thief. And I was influenced by that. There's some art thievery in this book that it ends up with a happy ending, if such a thing is possible, because the bad cop, the bent cop, his job has been taken over by the very upright Luke. And I did, of course. Luke had to, Emma needed a boyfriend, didn't she? Yeah.
Okay, so this book is a love story, but it's also an amazing, beautiful story about friendship and an unlikely friendship. And, can you talk about the friendship between Emma and Frank that develops?
I will.
And also why you didn't, the temptation maybe to have a romance between them.
Right from the get-go, when her parents, they take her out for her 32nd birthday and break the news, we're giving you the business and we're giving you the house, you need a boarder, and that would be Frank Crowley. And I knew right away I wanted to make him old enough that the reader wouldn't think this was a setup for a romance. So this is just a little bit about Frank. I knew almost immediately that landladyhood was working. On day 1, Frank corrected the time on my coffee maker and programmed it to brew 4 cups at 6:30 every morning. He took the trash and recycling bins to the curb the first Wednesday he was in residence, noticed what needed tightening or oiling, and performed tasks unknown to me, such as emptying the crumbs we collected at the bottom of the toaster. And let's see. And then he says he has something important he'd like to talk to her about, and that was he wanted to get a dog. He'd always wanted a dog, but Ginger didn't let him get one. I told him I'd always wanted a dog too. He said he'd go to the pound. Maybe there would be an older dog whose owner had died, fully trained. One day later, enter a squat little girl, part pit bull, part basset hound, brindled in brown and gold. She was orphaned of indeterminate age, maybe 2, maybe 3 years old, guessed the vet, and instantly in love with Frank, and to a slightly less ecstatic degree, me. She'd been named Sad Eyes at the shelter, which Frank softened to a relatable long eye Ivy.
I also want to ask you about writing about death, because a number of characters die in this book. At Lake Devine, there's... I don't want to spoiler, but there's a lot of death.
When I was writing The Inn at Lake Devine, which was my 4th novel, maybe 5th, came out in 1998, I think. I knew I had to kill off a character. And it was important for the plot that I thought I might be developing to kill off this young woman. And I called Stacy Schiff, the renowned Pulitzer Prize winning now biographer and historian, Cleopatra, Samuel Adams, The Witches. She was my first editor. And I called her and said, I know I have to kill off, I won't say the person's name, but I don't want to do it. And she said, you're going to do it and you're going to make it funny.
Well, there are funny deaths, and which, I mean,
Well, Ginger, I don't do that many villains. Usually my villains are like horrible people who are mean to other people or they're anti-Semites. So Ginger, that was easy. Never met her, killed her off. She deserved it. But let me think about other deaths. Yeah, I think, I don't want to break my readers' hearts. So if I'm killing off a character, it's going to be they deserve it usually.
Right.
I think.
Or unless you're the setup, because Emma's mother. We learned that Emma's mother has.
This is very true.
Yes.
Yes. Emma, the wonderful parents I mentioned, actually Beth is, became Emma's stepmother when she was about 6, her mother died when she was 6. And I don't go deeply into that, but just about, it really, I think, illustrates what a wonderful father she had, also a math teacher. And Beth is a neighbor who brings over a timely chocolate cake after, when he's been widowed, as those things happen.
So, Emma's, as you mentioned, her father is wonderful. And yesterday, when you were speaking in that tent over there, you said, I come from an extremely functional family, which I think is probably unusual for a novelist. And
There's not much material there, yeah.
So how have you gotten beyond your functional family? And I mean, you've written 16 novels, so you must.
My parents in my novels, it's the same. I think in The Way Men Act, the mother is a little quirky, and even though highly functional, I borrowed my mother. My mother had a condiment phobia. So I was raised without, ketchup or mayonnaise or relish, you name it, salad dressing, nothing, pickles, anything was a condiment. So I gave my character that same little quirk, and I added one, which was that. Because I knew someone else whose little phobia was she only wanted whole food. So given a choice in a restaurant between mashed potatoes and a baked potato, she would always choose the baked potato. So I added that, and when my mother read the book, she wasn't at all offended, but she said, I don't do that about the whole foods. So no, I had, very doting parents, and my character's parents tend to be supportive. In Ms. Demeanor, she's on house arrest, and her parents, visit, and, it was, an overly harsh sentence for just a little public indecency. And, what am I writing now? Yeah, I have a hard time writing, sort of abandoned, disenfranchised children.
It's nice to have nice parents in novels. So in the tradition of write what you know,
Okay.
I'm assuming there was no house of ill repute. And
There wasn't, and just the way my character in Ms. Demeanor, suddenly I wrote this sentence that the sort of homegrown little writing job she was going to do, I suddenly wrote, which was a good idea because I was under house arrest, my character writes. And I thought, that could be fun. And so that's how that happened. And with Every Tom, Dick, and Harry, she makes that outreach phone call to Lois in California, who owns the house on Quail Ridge Road. And there was something about Lois. She was rude, she got woken up because Emma didn't realize she was calling California, and she's in bed with this guy Billy, who came from nowhere, who she met 2 weeks ago on a cruise. So I think it gave me a suggestion that I don't know what, I suddenly came up with the brothel, and then again I thought, that could be fun.
And you're very non-judgmental.
That's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yes, because because it was in the past, I don't have to talk about, sort of the day-to-day goings on at the brothel. So it's more like the records that got found there, because Emma's job, like everything has to be de-accessioned. Is that a verb? De-accessioned? Yes. And so there's some history that gets, and some, names that get revealed, but there's a couple of women that sort of show up at the aforementioned bad cop Manny. He has an art show in town, and he invites some of those women, and I forget why they come, but a couple of them come, and then
So this is the only novel that I've read where I had the experience of reading this and being like, oh, I really want to, where I wanted to introduce the characters to other characters in other novels, where I was like, oh, they would get along so well. And I really wanted to introduce Emma to Sally and the Latecomer, who also does sort of this type of work. And I thought, oh, they would be friends. And I think I had that experience. I suspect because the way you write dialogue is so engaging and brings you into the characters so well that I want to be having conversations with them, but not only like with me. I was like, let me introduce you to Sally and other, but it's the only time I've wanted to introduce, had this feeling of like, oh, you should meet so-and-so from this book.
That's a wonderful compliment. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can you talk about writing dialogue and how you approach writing dialogue?
Dialogue is the easiest thing for me. And one of the approaches is I follow something David Mamet said, quoting William Goldman, the screenwriter, to get into a scene as late as possible and get out of the scene as early as possible. So if I write, and there's a little bit of like walking into a room or hello, how are you, I keep covering up those lines to when a character will say something like, well, we already thought of that, something like that, let the reader easily fill in. But the dialogue it's the easiest thing for me, and the thing that is, I have to push myself to do description and really exposition too. And Stacy Schiff hasn't been my editor since about 1987. She still reads my chapters as I write them. And she once wrote, it was in Isabel's bed, I remember, and my characters were talking, and she wrote in the margin, could someone here please pass the potatoes? So I need to remind myself to have them do something. And she'll also ask, like, what is she wearing? And so I don't do that much. I try. But I don't like to read a lot of description. And I like to quote one of my former editors. There was a book she loved, and she recommended it to her son, who was 11 or 12. And she said, "Did you like it?" And he said, "No, not really." And she said, "Why not?" And he said, "Too much wind in the trees."
Oh, beautiful.
So
beautiful.
Yeah, reaching for poeticism, I really don't like. I think the reader can fill in so much. And I remember And Then She Found Me. All I did was have my character sort of run her hand along. It was kind of a suede-like couch, and that was all the description that was of that apartment. And people say, like, "Oh, I love your description," and I'm thinking, well, you only need to say one thing, I think.
Yeah, so true. So when you were saying you come into the room as late as possible, do you start off in a first draft being like, "Hi, how are you?" and then you clip it out, or do you just know you're entering? Like, do you have those early formalities, or?
I'm not really, hello, how are you? but I definitely still cover up the lines that might be explaining or repeating a conversation that character had with another character in the last chapter. And one of my editors used to write, it was so helpful, she would just write in the margin, "We know this. We know this." And another simple, helpful hint. So, but usually when it reaches the stage of getting to my editor, it's usually I have to expand a little bit. It's almost, I don't think it's ever been cutting, because I cut too aggressively myself. So it's just expand. And I remember once the same editor who used to say, or was it? I've had a million editors, and it's not my fault. They leave their jobs, and I love them, and I think this is the best editor I ever have, and then they go to another house, and then someone else comes in, and I love her too, and then they get hired away somewhere else. But a wonderful editor named Jane Austen, I remember in The Way Men Act, at the end of a chapter, she just wrote, "Could you turn up the volume on Dennis here?" And I knew just what she meant, and I appreciated that.
So, Elinor, it sounds like you're very open to feedback from your editors, and it's very collaborative. And I'm wondering what your process is before the editor gets to it. If you have readers, if you have a writing group, what
it is for the longest time, my oldest, dearest friend in the world was a writer, Maeve Medwed, and she died in 2021. So I would send her, so there was Maeve and Stacy, good cop, bad cop. So Maeve would read it instantly, call me up, and rave about how fabulous it was. And then Stacy, my old editor, would line edit it. And sometimes she would substitute her own word for mine, and I learned, it takes me a long time to say, this is my 15th book. I can probably choose my own word here. And besides, she doesn't write fiction, I say to myself secretly, or, in my house. So that's it. Then I write a chapter, and then because I'm passing it on now to just Stacy, I revise and revise and revise, and take the chapter out of the novel and put it in its own document, and then revise it some more till I can't polish it anymore, and then I send it to Stacy. So it's kind of done when it's done, because I've obsessively revised and polished. But I am open because, Stephen King wrote in his book on writing that the editors always write. And I kind of think that.
We're going to open this up to questions from the audience if there are. Well, they just, no, yes?
Oh, you got that?
Yeah, no,
okay.
I got the shoulder tap.
Okay.
If anyone has questions over here.
And if not, I will keep asking them until you do. What? No, come ask.
Oh, come on.
But while you're heading up here, I'm just going to ask about your entry into becoming a novelist.
Yeah, I started with short stories. I took a writer's workshop at Brandeis Adult Ed for $40 for 10 weeks, and started. And never written. I'd written, I had written features and journalism, but so started so slowly writing stories, and then my first collection. And Stacy was my 25-year-old editor at Viking who published that first book.
I was intrigued with the idea that Kate started about, the fact that you had this lovely family. And I wondered if that proceeded throughout the rest of your life. Were you as a child intrigued by people who came from complicated families? Did that interest you? Or have you just always been looking for the sunny side of everything?
I would say that I was interested in, and I'm a big eavesdropper. So if I'm, at a restaurant and somebody at the next table, I can sort of lose myself in what they're saying. So I would say, I'm very interested in, everything, crime and punishment and adultery and all kinds of divorce. Yes, for sure. and it's really, I think, limited to the parents in the books that I have a hard time making, villains or abusers or things like that.
Thank you. It's a wonderful conversation. And I know yesterday you described yourself as something like accidentally funny, unintentionally funny, right? And I saw that you had a comment on Wally Lamb's book, right? And you were just saying you appreciate the range of life in some way. What do you think in writing in terms of the value of humor and amusement as opposed to trauma and redemption and pain?
Well, I feel that I like smart, funny books, but I read a lot of different things. But when my son was about 10 or 11 or something like that, and someone asked in front of him if I liked, and it was it was a famous movie that was set in Vietnam. Does anyone remember the name of that? All kinds of Academy Awards, and asked if I'd seen it. And my son answered for me and said, "My mother only likes Affirmation of the Human Spirit." Yeah. So I would say that, I want my readers to be satisfied. And I think satisfaction is a happy ending. And, I have a good example of William Shakespeare. All his comedies they end in weddings. So, there we go. But no, I read memoir, and I read biographies and history. And, so I don't know if that answers your question.
You've said that you don't try to write funny.
No, I don't. It's sort of, I just write what I observe. And I've learned over the years that I might observe things in a quirky enough way, and I'm not trying for that people laugh. And of course I love that. But I don't want to be, sometimes I'll read a book and maybe I'm sent a book because someone thinks it's funny and an editor and asks for a blurb. And I can tell right away whether they're reaching for jokes and trying to be funny. And I just like, just the way when I watch stand-up comedy, and the funniest things for me is when a comic is just talking about his life and his marriage and his children, and they're not going for jokes. It's just there's like inherent humor in their way of looking at it. So I'm not trying for that, but I think, that's something that happens.
Do you know when you're being funny?
I don't know. No, I don't know, because I'm surprised when people laugh. For example, and then, am I going over here? With that thing about the crumbs, that Frank emptied the crumbs in the toaster. When Stacy Schiff read that, because we had the opening thing in February at an event, so she was rereading the book, and she said to me, "I think that's the funniest line you ever wrote." And and to me, I was looking for things that people do in the kitchen, which is set the timer on the coffee maker that's like reading 12:00 forever, and emptying. Yeah. So I think that's an example of who knew.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but if we still have time, I want to go back a little bit and ask you about your modern love piece.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, there are two of them.
There are two of them. Okay.
Right.
So
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you like me to say? It's personal. It's because it's modern love. Well, I wrote a modern love piece. It's embarrassing a little bit, but about how I met my partner, who's sitting in the audience, so I'm not going to point to him. But he is my art consultant very much. But anyway, I was widowed, and I was on Match.com because one of my characters was widowed, and I put her on Match.com. And okay, so anyway, one morning I clicked on one of my morning matches, and it was somebody, and I liked where he lived and his favorite food, and all of like what else favorite activities. Last book read was one of mine. So anyway, and there's no, according to my daughter-in-law who used to work for Match.com, it's only an algorithm. They don't match you up. They don't think, oh, he's a fan of Elinor Lipman. I'll put them together. So that was just fate.
Happy ending.
And last time I introduced him in the audience, I'm not going to do that, but like everybody, like when we got outside of the building, then everybody was like pinching his cheek. So.
Well, I didn't want to embarrass you, sorry, but it's such a delightful. Any other audience questions? Nope. How much time do we have? A couple more.
I can just say one thing about editing. Oh,
Okay.
hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, guys. I've had the privilege of hearing Elinor talk about this book before, but I want to ask a different question. So I know you teach writing sometime. And so what are some of the things that are really important for you to convey to your students besides the dialogue advice? I mean, if somebody, what's your, do you have, 2 or 3 things you really want to impress on your writing students?
It's not so much, they would each have their own, and I haven't taught for a long time, but one of them is like I wouldn't interfere with their own style. If I think, and I'm big on run-on, fixing their run-on sentences and their comma faults. Like I do a whole class on that. But some of them are the tips that I learned in that writing class at Brandeis. One of them was prepare to write badly. And that's good because you sit down and you're not feeling the least bit inspired. So, write some sentence. So, prepare to write badly. And the teacher also said sometimes the best form of revision is to start something new. Yeah, I've done that too. Throw it out.
But then go back to it, or then see it in a new way.
I think if it's been revised 5 times or for 10 years,
maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can't really say that. I don't like the reaching for effect, reaching for that poeticism, reaching for, just like Elmore Leonard said in his 20 do's and don'ts, don't start with the weather. Don't start with the flora and the fauna because it's just kind of some, bad habit, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And maybe one last question, which we touched on. So this book is in first person. You said almost all your novels are from the first person. I think it brings you in so intimately. But can you talk about why you like to write? Yes.
My first book, Then She Found Me, first person. Stacy was the editor. I started the second one, and I said to her, I think I should do third person because, maybe it's more, I don't know, grown up, more adult, more literary. And she said, no. Just like that. And I said, why? And she said, because with first person, you can go down and dirty. So she just meant, inside someone's house. And I'm not a fan of, many fabulous prize-winning novels have, points of view, different chapters. But I don't do that because in that fiction writing course at Brandeis, it was so don't switch points of view, don't switch points of view. That was a sin. So I think I've carried that over to don't even have different chapters with different characters. So anyway.
Well, the characters are fabulous. Elinor is going to be signing in wherever the book signing.
And I don't usually do this. But, and this is me being your personal shopper, don't forget there's all these authors and you take care of your Christmas, Hanukkah, Mother's Day, Father's Day. Do it now, get them signed, wrap them up, you're all set.
Labor Day.
Labor Day.